The air cracked like a breaking spine. A single war horn split the pre-dawn stillness, and 300 torches bloomed along the cliff edge in a perfect arc of fire. From the deck of the longship Seawolf, Captain Eirik, the Red Hand, saw the torches reflected in the black water, orange serpents writhing beneath his hull. He tasted copper in the wind. That was the moment he knew they hadn't come for gold. They had come for him. Behind him, the fjord narrowed to a throat of stone. Ahead, the village of Skogarklitter, no more than a huddle of turf-roofed huts, should have been asleep. Instead, every door was flung wide and every man, woman, and child stood on the shingle with spears, pitchforks, and ancient axes passed down from grandfathers who had fought beside berserkers. The youngest warrior looked 10 summers old. The oldest's beard had gone white as sea foam. All 300 stared at Eirik with the same unblinking fury. "Row steady," he whispered, but the words tasted like ash. His oarsman's breath steamed in the frost. None spoke. They'd followed him through storms, through ice, through the burning monasteries of Lindisfarne. But this was different. This felt like a funeral at sea. A single drumbeat pounded from the cliff. Then another. Then a rhythm that shook the ribs of the ship itself. The torches dipped in unison and the front line parted. Astrid, the village chieftain, stepped forward. She wore a cloak of raven feathers, and in her right hand she carried the broken haft of a long axe. Its blade had once belonged to Eirik. He recognized the notch where it had split a Saxon shield at Stamford Bridge. She raised the axe and pointed it straight at his heart. "Return what you stole," her voice carried over the water, low and terrible, "or burn where you float." For one heartbeat the world narrowed to the space between her eyes and his. Memories crashed like waves. Eirik standing on this same shore 3 winters ago, sparing a boy who had dropped his sword. That boy, now a man, stood beside Astrid, scarred and grim. Had mercy become betrayal? Eirik's first mate Olaf stepped to the rail. His knuckles were white on the dragon-head prow. "Captain," he hissed, "give the order. We can still ram through the fishing boats, break the line." But Eirik's gaze flicked to the cliff face. "Archers. At least 50. The moment Seawolf moved, the sky would rain death." He raised both hands, empty, palms open. The drumbeat faltered. "I took nothing from Skogarklitter," he called, his voice raw as winter wind. "Search my hold. You will find only salt fish and wool." Astrid's lip curled. She gestured to 2 boys who dragged forward a wooden crate. They flipped it open. Inside lay children's shoes, tiny, mud-stained, some still laced. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Eirik's stomach turned to ice. Those were not his. He had never. Liar. Astrid's word cracked like a whip. 3 nights ago raiders flew your banner. They burned our granary and took my granddaughter. She is 7. The torchlight painted tears on the old woman's cheeks. Eirik felt them like brands on his own skin. Behind him his crew shifted, confused. Whispers rose. Asterisk banner? Impossible. Asterisk, yet the evidence lay glinting in the crate, iron rivets from Seawolf's own sail. Someone had framed him. The drum resumed, faster now, driving blood against bone. Arrows knocked. Spears leveled. The fjord itself seemed to inhale, waiting for the first scream. Eirik drew a single breath that tasted of pine smoke and fear. He stepped onto the prow so every eye could see him. "Then let the gods judge," he shouted. "I will walk to your shore alone. If I lie, burn me. If I speak truth, let us hunt the real thieves together." Silence fell so complete the crackle of torches sounded like thunder. Even the gulls stopped wheeling overhead. Astrid's eyes narrowed to slits. She flicked 2 fingers. Warriors parted, forming a corridor of steel and fire from waterline to clifftop. One path. One chance. Eirik unbuckled his sword belt. Steel clattered onto the deck. He raised his empty hands again. "Tell me, traveler," the screen would flash in white text, "would you step into that corridor knowing 300 blades wait for your heartbeat to falter?" He took the first step over the gunwale. The cold water closed over his boots like a grave. Drumbeat. Second step. Drumbeat. Behind him Olaf whispered a prayer to Thor. The salt wind whipped Eirik's cloak, but it was the smell of burning pine that hurled him 6 months backward in time. One lungful of smoke and he was standing again outside the monastery of Lindisfarne, the child's scream still lodged in his skull like a splintered arrow. Snap. Present. Olaf's knuckles on the tiller, white as whalebone. Asterisk snap. Asterisk past. A small boy, barely 6 summers, dropping his wooden sword as flames licked the rafters. Eirik blinked hard, but the memory clung. The boy had run toward him, not away, trusting the red cloak that once meant safety. Then the roof beam gave way. Irik's axe had hesitated half a heartbeat, long enough for the beam to fall, long enough for the scream to cut out, long enough for guilt to slip into his marrow and stay. Now on the Seawolf's deck, the same cloak snapped like a blood-stained flag. He tasted iron where he'd bitten through his own lip. Olaf's voice was a low snarl. "Captain, the tide's turning. We either beach now or starve before nightfall." Ahead, Skogarklitter's cottages glowed amber with hearth light. Smoke curled from chimneys, warm, inviting, alive. Irik's stomach growled, so did the crew's. 8 days at sea on half rations left ribs showing beneath mail shirts. One raid, 1 hour, and they could feast on goat meat and barley bread. But beneath the hunger gnawed something sharper. He closed his eyes. The boy's wooden sword lay splintered in memory, its painted runes half burned away. Could you live with that scream in your ears every time you close your eyes? The question clawed at his throat. "Signal the men," Olaf pressed. "We hit the storehouse first, leave the people if they don't fight." Irik opened his eyes. The village's single bell tower stood silhouetted against the dying sun. He remembered the monastery bell, molten in the fire, its bronze weeping metal tears. His hand drifted to the axe at his belt, its edge still bore a notch from that night. He traced it with a thumb, felt the gouge like a scar on his own soul. "Captain?" Olaf again, this time with steel in the word. Irik's gaze swept the deck. Young Rolf, barely 15, sharpening his blade with too much eagerness. Old Gunnar, whose hands shook unless wrapped around a tankard or a throat. All of them hungry. All of them watching him. He imagined them storming ashore. Doors splintering, women clutching children, goats scattering like white ghosts in the moonlight. He saw the boy's face again, this time on a Skogarklitter child, eyes wide with trust that would turn to terror the instant the first torch touched thatch. "Choose," the memory whispered. "Feed your crew or spare the innocent." The wind shifted. On it rode the scent of baking bread and something sweeter, wild honey maybe. His mouth watered, but his stomach clenched like a fist. Olaf shifted impatiently, 1 foot already on the rail. Irik lifted his hand. The crew froze, oars poised mid-air. Silence fell so absolute the slap of waves against the hull sounded like slow applause. "We sail past," he said, voice rough as driftwood. "No blood tonight." Olaf's face darkened. "You'd see us starve for the sake of sheep farmers?" "I'd see us live with ourselves," Irik snapped. The words tasted like bile. A low growl rippled through the men. Gunnar spat overboard. Rolf's knuckles whitened on his oar. The Seawolf drifted closer to the surf. The village lights now close enough to count. 6 cottages, 1 barn, a single watchfire. Close enough to hear laughter drifting over the water. Close enough to take. Olaf stepped forward until their mail shirts clinked. "You lost your nerve, Captain. Maybe it's time someone else led." The challenge hung between them like a drawn blade. Irik felt the weight of every eye on the deck. One wrong word and the crew would tear itself apart before a single arrow flew from shore. He drew a slow breath, tasting salt and pine smoke and the ghost of burning timber. He unbuckled his sword belt. Steel rang as it hit the planks. "Then lead, Olaf. But know this, every drop spilled tonight will be on your dreams, not mine." The younger man hesitated, gaze flicking to the village, to the crew, to Irik's empty hands. For a heartbeat the only sound was the creak of rigging and the distant bark of a dog. Then a child's laughter carried across the water, clear, bright, alive. Olaf's jaw clenched but his shoulders sagged. He didn't pick up the sword. Irik turned to the crew. "Lower the sail. We beach south of the headland, there's a cove with mussels and fresh water. We eat without burning homes." Grumbles but no revolt. "Not yet." The Seawolf veered away from the village lights toward the darker, empty shore. Behind them, Skogarklitter's bell tower stood untouched, its bronze tongue silent in the wind. But as the ship slipped into shadow, Irik heard it, the faintest echo of war horns from the north. Not from the village. From the cliffs beyond. He gripped the rail, blood pounding. Someone else was coming. Someone who wouldn't hesitate. The boy's wooden sword flashed in memory once more. Irik closed his fist around the notch in his axe handle and whispered to the dark, "Not again." Dawn bled across the fjord like a wound. The Seawolf sat motionless, oars shipped, sail half-furled, a lone wolf surrounded by fireflies. 300 torches ringed the shingle in a perfect crescent, their flames snapping in the offshore wind. Each torch belonged to a farmer, a fisher, a grandmother with iron in her spine. Each flame painted sharp shadows under Astrid's raven feather cloak as she stepped onto the waterline, boots sinking into wet sand. Irik stood on the prow, mail shirt glinting salt white, axe still on the deck behind him, an offering and a dare. The space between ship and shore stretched barely 30 paces, yet it felt like the edge of the world. One heartbeat too many and it would become a graveyard. A drum spoke, low, steady, inevitable, boom, boom, boom. With every strike a torch dipped, then rose again, a silent promise. We are many, we are ready. Astrid raised the broken axe haft Eirik had left behind years ago. Its blade was gone, but the notch he'd carved into the ashwood handle, his personal mark, caught the firelight. You know this, she called, voice carrying over the hush. It once spared my grandson. Tonight it buys you one chance to speak. Behind Eirik, Olaf muttered, 30 paces. We could loose a volley, scatter them. Eirik didn't turn. Count the archers on the cliff first. Olaf's gaze flicked upward. 50. Maybe 60. Strings drawn. The sky itself seemed strung and waiting. Eirik stepped onto the gunwale. The longship rocked gently, a cradle on a funeral tide. I turned my ship away from your village last night, he shouted. Search my hold, you'll find no stolen grain, no children's shoes. Astrid's eyes narrowed. She signaled. 2 boys dragged forward the crate he'd glimpsed in the dark, 6 pairs of tiny shoes, soles caked with fresh mud. They spilled across the sand like dead birds. A collective growl rolled through the torch ring. Eirik's stomach lurched. Not ours. But the color of the leather, the style of the stitching, too similar. Someone had painted guilt onto his sails. Those are Saxon make, he called, desperation sharpening his voice. Look at the crosses burned into the heel. He felt the crew's uncertainty ripple behind him. Even Olaf swallowed hard. Astrid studied the shoes, then lifted a small one between thumb and forefinger. A single green ribbon, faded, frayed, still clung to the lace. Her face changed, a storm breaking into sudden sunlight. She turned to the crowd and spoke in rapid Norse, too quick for Eirik to catch. A low murmur answered, torches wavering. She faced him again. The ribbon belonged to my granddaughter, lost 3 winters past. You say you did not take her, prove it. Eirik's mind raced. He could feel the cliff archer's fingers tightening on you staves. One wrong word and the fjord would drink Viking blood by sunrise. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a scrap of green wool, identical ribbon, torn from his own cloak the night he'd spared the monastery boy. The same dye, the same weave. He held it high so every torch could see. A collective gasp rippled outward. Astrid's torch dipped, then rose again, this time not in threat but recognition. You kept the match, she whispered, wonder bleeding through anger. Behind Eirik, Olaf hissed, Captain, they're wavering. One push and we all drown, Eirik snapped. He leapt down onto the sand, boots splashing ankle deep. He walked, slow, deliberate, until the broken axe haft hovered inches from his chest. He knelt. Not in surrender but in offer. Take me if you must, but let my crew sail. They followed my orders, the guilt is mine. Silence pressed down like a burial stone. Even the gulls had stopped circling. Astrid studied his face, sun-weathered, scarred, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She saw no lie. A child's voice cut the hush. A girl no more than 7, slipping between grown legs. She pointed at Eirik's empty scabbard and tugged Astrid's cloak. He has no sword, grandmother. The crowd leaned in, a single organism breathing as one. Astrid rested the broken haft on Eirik's shoulder. Not a blow but a touch of ceremony. Rise, she said. If your heart is true, stand beside us. The real raiders wear your colors and sail under your name. Hunt them with us or be hunted for them. Eirik felt the weight of 300 gazes. Behind him, Olaf's knuckles whitened on the rail. The crew held its breath. Hope flickered, fragile as frost on steel. He stood. Give me 3 days, he called, voice ringing off the cliffs. 3 days to bring you proof, and the heads of those who defile my name. Astrid's torch lowered. One by one the others followed, until the ring became a galaxy of stars at knee height. The archers relaxed, arrows sliding back into quivers like drawn breaths released. But before relief could take root, a horn blast shattered the dawn. Not from the village. From the northern headland, 3 sharp notes that meant only one thing. Longships approaching. Fast. Astrid's eyes met Eirik's. Your 3 days may have just become 3 heartbeats. The north wind died. 300 torches lowered as one, their flames bowing like wheat before a storm that never came. On the shingle, Astrid pressed the green ribbon into Eirik's palm. The same scrap he had torn from his cloak 6 months and a lifetime ago. It felt heavier now, soaked not with seawater but with the weight of every tear not shed, every life not taken. Behind them, the villagers formed a silent corridor. Children who had clutched pitchforks now clutched their mothers' hands. The old goatherd, whose grandson Eirik had once spared, stepped forward and placed the broken axe haft across Eirik's shoulders, not as a yoke but as a mantle. "You carry our debts now," he said, voice trembling. "And our hope." On the Seawolf's deck, Olaf knelt. The mutinous fire in his eyes had guttered to embers. He laid the child's wooden sword, retrieved from the ashes of Lindisfarne, at Eirik's feet. "I thought strength was in the swing," he whispered. "I was wrong." The sword, half charred, half smooth, gleamed like a promise reborn. Eirik lifted it. The notch he had carved when he was 10 caught the dawn light. He turned to the crowd, farmers, fishers, warriors no longer enemies, and raised the sword high. "This belonged to a boy who believed Vikings were heroes. Today we start earning that name." A cheer rose, not the roar of conquest, but the exhale of 600 lungs releasing 6 months of fear. Astrid's granddaughter, the 7-year-old whose shoes had nearly sparked a massacre, darted forward. She pressed a single buttercup into Eirik's gauntlet hand. "For the horses," she said solemnly. "They get scared of fire." The buttercup was absurdly small against scarred steel, yet it bent the morning light like a prism. Eirik felt something inside him crack open, not shatter but bloom. He knelt so their eyes were level. "I will plant a field of these," he told her. "So no horse ever fears us again." Behind him the crew began unloading crates, not for plunder but for repair. Salt fish for granaries, wool for looms, nails for rebuilding the burned shed they had once come to destroy. Each gift passed hand to hand became a thread stitching 2 worlds together. The village women wrapped the Vikings in homespun cloaks dyed the color of sea foam. The Vikings taught the boys how to splice rope that could hold a ship, or a promise. At midday they lit a single fire on the beach. Not a raid pyre but a feast. Children chased each other between long tables of cedar planks laid across driftwood. Laughter rose like gulls. Someone produced a battered fiddle. Its first notes wobbled, then soared. Old Gunnar wept openly into his ale horn, claiming it was the smoke. Eirik stood apart for a moment, watching. Astrid joined him, her raven cloak now draped across his shoulders like shared wings. "I thought I would bury you here," she admitted. "Instead, we buried the war." He touched the green ribbon tied now around his wrist. "We buried nothing. We planted something." A hush fell as the fiddle stilled. The villagers formed a circle, Vikings and farmers, children and elders, the living and the memory of the dead. Astrid lifted a horn of mead. "To the captain who chose mercy over murder. To the village that chose justice over vengeance," Eirik answered. They drank. The mead tasted of honey and salt and the first rain after drought. But as the sun dipped toward the western cliffs, a scout came running, breathless, boots spraying sand. He skidded to a halt before Eirik and Astrid. "Longships," he panted. "Black sails. 2 dozen. Flying a wolf's head on crimson." The circle froze. Olaf's hand dropped to his hilt, Astrid's eyes flashed. Eirik felt the old fire kindle, not rage but resolve. He turned to the crowd, voice steady. "Those are the men who burned your granary. Who stole your children. Who wore my colors like a lie." He raised the buttercup. "We have 3 days' sail ahead of us. 3 days to teach the world what happens when cowards hide behind heroes' names." Astrid grasped his forearm. "Then we sail together. Your crew, our boats, our hearts." The villagers roared, no longer farmers, no longer raiders, but something new forged in the fire of choice. Children raised wooden swords and buttercups alike. The old goatherd struck the broken axe haft against a shield, and the sound rang like a bell. Eirik looked at the camera, at every viewer holding their breath. His eyes were no longer the hollow pits of a haunted man, they blazed with the dawn behind him. Comment below, will you sail with us? The hunt begins at sunrise, and the wolves won't know what hit them. The sun balanced on the knife edge of the world and did not bleed. Instead, it bled gold, thick honeyed light that poured across the fjord and turned every torch into a buttercup. 300 flames lowered as one, their heat replaced by the warmth of a single bonfire crackling on the shingle. Sparks rose like startled swallows and winked out against the violet sky, carrying with them the last ember of 6 months of fear. Eirik stood barefoot in the sand, cloak discarded, mail shirt open at the throat. Salt crusted his beard, mead lingered on his tongue like liquid sunrise. In his right hand he held the child's half-charred wooden sword, its tip now carved into the shape of a buttercup petal. In his left, the green ribbon fluttered, no longer a debt but a banner. Around him Vikings and villagers formed a living circle, Boots and bare feet, iron and wool, enemy 6 hours ago, family now. Old Gunnar, eyes rimmed red, passed a horn of mead to the goatherd who had once faced him with nothing but a pitchfork. They drank in silence that said everything. Astrid stepped into the circle's heart. The raven cloak had been replaced by a simple wool dress the color of sea foam. She carried the broken axe haft like a staff, its jagged end wrapped in fresh green twine. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried over the crackle of the fire and the hush of the tide. 6 months ago, she began, this blade nearly cleaved our worlds in two. Tonight it joins them. She lifted the haft high. Firelight danced along the notch Eirik had carved as a boy. With deliberate care, she pressed the wood into the flames. It caught slowly, reluctantly, ash resisting its own death, then blazed bright as a comet. Gasps rippled outward. Children leaned forward, eyes wide with something between awe and understanding. Destruction becoming memory, becoming light. Eirik stepped beside her. In the sudden silence, the only sound was the soft pop of sap and the distant cry of gulls. He raised the buttercup sword like a toast. To the boy who believed Vikings were heroes, he said. May we finally become the stories he told. A cheer rose, not the roar of conquest, but the exhale of 600 lungs releasing 6 months of held breath. It rolled across the water and startled a flight of geese into the sky, their wings beating like applause. A small hand slipped into Eirik's. The 7-year-old granddaughter, whose shoes had once been evidence of guilt, looked up with solemn eyes. Will you plant the field now? She asked. So the horses don't fear? He knelt so their foreheads touched. Tonight we plant. Tomorrow we sail. Behind them, the crew had already begun loading crates, not for raiding but for gifting. Barrels of salt fish, coils of rope, a dozen iron plowshares hammered from old sword blades. Each item passed from Viking hand to farmer hand became a thread stitching two worlds into one. Olaf, once mutinous, now stood at the waterline tying a fresh sail of undyed wool. He glanced at Eirik and grinned, a lopsided boyish thing that made him look 10 years younger. Captain, he called, the wind smells like wolves. Eirik's smile was sharp as a newly honed blade. Good. Wolves run fastest when they're afraid. Astrid raised the mead horn again. This time her voice rang like a bell. To the wolves who wore our skins, and to the hunters who will not let them. They drank. The mead tasted of honey and salt and the first rain after drought. When the horn came back to Eirik, he held it high, turned to face the camera, to face every viewer holding their breath, and spoke directly into their living rooms, their phones, their midnight doubts.